podcast about truth-telling on politics and health. I'm your host, Jake Williams. Today's truth: microplastics are everywhere. We're drinking, eating, and even breathing them, and the health impacts are pretty alarming. I thought I'd been generally aware of this microplastics issue, but then last year I read a study about microplastics being found in penises. Yes, penises. And I said, wait a second. This caught my attention as something I'd like to personally avoid. But more importantly, it led me to learn more about the effects of microplastics on the reproductive health of both men and women. And then I read a study on how microplastics in the air can contribute to these harms, plus add to cancer risk as well. And then I thought, we have to do a podcast on this. So I recruited one of the authors of that study, Dr. Tracey Woodruff, to come onto the podcast and help us learn more. Dr. Woodruff is a professor of obstetrics, gynecology, and reproductive sciences at the University of California, San Francisco, where she directs the program on reproductive health and the environment. Here is my chat with Dr. Tracey Woodruff. Tracey Woodruff, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
I'm going to start super basic here. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
What are microplastics made out of, and where do we come in contact with them?
That's pretty basic. As you can imagine, the name's pretty self-explanatory. Microplastics are little plastics. So, we think about them as there's a big size range after they're smaller than, there's a technical definition, like 5 millimeters in length on one side. So think of like a pencil tip. So you can have that could be a plastic, a degraded plastic, or something that's primarily manufactured that you can see with your eye. But a lot of these plastics are even smaller than that. So they can be smaller than a red blood cell. They could be even smaller than that. So there's a huge range of microplastics, but they're basically little plastics that have been generally come from bigger plastics that then are degraded in the environment. So pretty basic, pretty self-explanatory. So, okay, why are we so concerned about them? Why is everyone talking about them? Well, first of all, they have a really good name so everyone can understand what they are, right?
Yeah.
Everyone knows what plastic is. And
Well,
microplastics.
actually, let's pause there just in case people don't. Plastic is made out of oil, right? Any other
Yeah,
key ingredients that we should know about?
that's a pretty good ingredient. So plastics come from fossil fuel production. So
Yeah.
fossil fuel sounds may sound a little abstract. So basically, when you're extracting natural gas, or it's really getting gas from the ground, a lot of that, or much of that goes, or some component of that goes into plastic. And I think the reason that we're seeing more interest in one of the reasons we're seeing more interest in plastic, and one reason we're seeing more microplastics, is because we've seen an increase in fossil fuel production. We've seen a doubling of plastic production since 2008. And
Wow.
behind the scenes in terms of fossil fuel production. So the fossil fuel industry, like many corporations, they plan on a longer time scale. And so one of the things that's been happening is they've been seeing what's been happening when the US or states are putting in regulations related to climate change. So we've seen cars starting to switch over, right, to more electric vehicles. You see the retirement of coal-fired power plants in the United States in response to issues around climate change. States and housing and buildings are starting to move more to electricity, which can come from non-fossil fuel energy. So the fossil fuel sector is like, well, but we have this product we make. We can debate whether it's great or not. And then they want to continue to make that product and want to continue to make a profit. And with the advent of fracking, so that's basically the ability to drill down into these shale areas and extract more of this natural gas, they are looking for new markets. And one of those markets one of their biggest bets is plastics and the chemicals that can be made from fossil fuels. Hence, more plastic.
So it goes fossil fuel production, plastic products to us. Let's talk about that last link in the chain.
Yeah.
So water bottles are, for example, a popular product that's cited. How else do how else do microplastics rather get from these products into us?
Yeah, sure. So microplastics kind of come in two varieties. The first variety is they're made. They make microplastics. They can be put into, for example, cosmetics or cleaning products or sometimes paint. So that's one subset of microplastics. But then there's the microplastics that just comes from degrading plastic related materials. And I think it's really interesting because people obviously they know the water bottle, right? They go, oh, I got the plastic water bottle for sure. That degrades plastic. But there's a lot of other single use, and the majority of this is single use plastic materials that people don't think about. One of them is tires, for example. Like
Hmm.
tire wear produces a lot of microplastics. Clothing, clothing that's made from polyester or rayon or synthetic materials, that also, fleece materials, that also releases microplastics. And those are
Hmm.
actually pretty big segments of the microplastic release. The biggest is single use plastics. I mean, that can be anything from a water bottle, but to industrial applications of plastic. So the plastic gets out and it gets out and about and it breaks down in the environment. It gets into water, so then we can drink it. It gets into the food supply. Maybe it goes down into fish. You can eat it through eating, meat. You can get it that way. A lot of our food comes
Wait,
wrapped in
it's through
plastic.
meat as well? So
Yeah.
it goes to the animal consumes the microplastic,
And
we
then we
consume the
consume
animal,
the
we get the
animal.
microplastic.
Yeah.
And are some animals more microplastic rich than others?
I mean, yeah, so like look at I would say that we know it comes from animals, but do I have there's still uncertainty about the amount that comes from different animals. I mean, we do know it's probably biomagnifying, meaning a little thing eats it, and then a bigger thing eats it, and then a bigger thing eats that. And then I don't know if we're bigger than a cow, but say we're at the top of the food chain, we eat that.
Right.
So I would say that there's definitely microplastics in different kinds of fish. People have measured microplastics in fish because, fish are in the ocean. So people have been interested in microplastics in fish or bivalves like oysters and mussels, which are doing filter feeding. The rule of thumb when we're thinking about chemicals that are also in the plastic or travel along with the plastic is that bigger and higher up on the food chain tends to mean more of that type of thing. I wouldn't say, we know for sure it's more in meat than it is in, because we also can find it, I think, is like in dairy, but then in fish. So I think there's still more that's being going on around that. But another important source of microplastics is just from eating food that's been in contact with plastics. So if you think about plastic wrapped food, you think about you microwave your food in plastic, you get these microwavable food and you microwave it, then the microplastics can get up through that. So there's also the potential to eat plastics through food being in contact with plastic somewhere along the supply chain. And then microplastic, you can breathe in microplastics. So like I said, it can wear off the tires and get in the air. Dust, like dust in your home, super popular place for chemicals to hang out, and microplastics can be in there too. So dust can get suspended in your home. You can breathe it. You can get it on your hands. You can hands go in your mouth, or little kids crawling around on the floor, right, can get it that way. It can also, I mean, there's some research to indicate that there could be some dermal absorption. Probably depends a lot on the size of the microplastics. Like the littler the plastic, the more likely it's going to go in, just loosely.
What are the health effects of ingesting microplastics in these various ways?
We did what's considered a gold standard review. So we use a particular approach to evaluating the current evidence on microplastics and three different types of health effects. And we did this as part of a project for the state of California that was sponsored by the California Science Policy Evidence Consortium. So the legislature asked the University of California, hey, will you look at a topic that's really important for us? And the year that we worked on this, it was microplastics. And so we had to do it in a short time scale. So we call it's a rapid review. We evaluated effects on the respiratory system, kind of the stomach and gut and colon, and then reproductive health effects. We looked at the respiratory system because we breathe microplastics. We looked at the gut or the stomach or the colon because our intestinal tract, because when you eat it or drink it, that's where it first comes into contact. And then we looked at reproductive health effects because those can be more sensitive to exposures to foreign objects or foreign toxic chemicals. And what we concluded was that microplastics are suspected to be harmful to the respiratory system, the digestive system, and to reproductive health, with particularly focused on effects on sperm quality, with potential links to cancer in the lungs and in the colon. And the reason why we said it was suspected is that we had pretty good animal evidence for these different health effects. There was still some uncertainties we had about the data, but it's enough to be concerned about the potential health effects of these microplastics. Now, we didn't cover other health endpoints that have been studied in the literature. So, for example, we didn't look at the study that looked at microplastics in the brain and how there were higher levels in people who had dementia. We also didn't look at the study on the cardiovascular health effects. So we think that this is there's two things to think about. Scientifically, we're at the beginning of better characterizing the health impacts of microplastics, but from the standpoint of doing something about it, there's certainly enough evidence that actions can be taken, whether it's for yourself or in a structural systemic policy approaches to reduce what is going to be the tripling of plastic in the next 30 years.
So I'm going to take some of these variables that you mentioned with my layperson brain and put them together to pose a question. You mentioned that plastic production has doubled since 2008. Separately, we've read about the rise of colorectal cancer in younger Americans, and we're trying to figure out why. And then you have this initial evidence, at least, that there may be cancer risk with microplastic ingestion. It seems like this is a territory worth exploring further, obviously, right?
Oh, definitely. I mean, definitely the role of plastic and plastic related chemicals in the rapid rise in colon cancer, particularly among young people. And it's also breast cancers as well. That's not genetics. That is something external going on in terms of factors. And certainly we know a lot about a fraction of the chemicals that are used in plastic in terms of their potential to adversely impact health. So we already know there's chemicals in plastic that can impact people's health, and we're learning about the microplastics themselves. So there's enough here, particularly because if you're going to increase plastic production and you already are pretty sure there's something going on, or you're more than 50% sure that something is going on, why would you want to expose more people to plastic? That would be the opposite of trying to improve people's health.
This is a rather detailed question, perhaps, but if plastic production has doubled since '08, what can we infer, or what do we know about any rise or lack thereof in our exposure to microplastics? As in, is there like a one-for-one relationship between that production and ingestion, or is that not known at this point?
Well, the studies on this are, I would say, not as robust as there are for some of the toxic chemicals that are used in plastic. But the study that I mentioned where they measured plastic in the brain tissue it's a relatively small number of participants, they did find that they also had some time trends for the microplastics, and they could see that the microplastic levels, where they measured the microplastics in the brain tissue for people later in the years, had more than the earlier ones. I can't remember the exact dates, but they definitely were seeing a trend for increasing levels of microplastics found in people, which totally makes sense. I mean, we know from many different studies of the chemicals that are used in plastic, whether it's perfluorinated chemicals, which are a plastic additive, or phthalates, which are used in plastics, or bisphenols, that when you change the emissions of the chemical, in these cases where there's been removal of those chemicals or decrease the use of those chemicals in the marketplace due to policies, the levels can go down. But the replacements for those will go up. So we know that production of these chemicals, or these plastic related chemicals, are influencing what people are exposed to. And it is probably very similar for microplastics.
So based on what you've described, this seems overwhelming, frankly, in terms of all the different ways that microplastics can get into your body. You
We can
can
talk
eat
about
it,
it
you can
for a
drink
long time.
it,
Yeah.
you can inhale it. So, uh, what are some common sense ways in our personal lives that we could limit exposure to microplastics?
Okay, so yeah, the first thing I want to say is I know it does seem overwhelming, and I am also in it too, like everyone else. I mean, I know more about this than have known it for a while, and it's so first of all, I want to first say it's not your fault that you have these exposures. It's really important because people get stressed out. They're like, what if I'm going to panic? And yeah, it's true. It's a situation that we need to deal with. We definitely need to address this. That's why we talk to people about these exposures and how it's important to reduce them. And there are things that you can do individually to reduce your exposures to toxic chemicals that are in these plastics. But the ultimate solution is really going to be to have the government do its job to intervene and stop, at least cap where we are in plastic production and roll it back. Now, I'm not confident this administration, that's not on their agenda, but they also want to make America healthy, so we'll see.
Yeah.
So, what are some of the things? So, there's really easy things that people can do. First of all, don't microwave in plastic. It's kind of our number one tip because it's pretty easy not to do because you could, even if it says microwavable safe, it's really not been evaluated for that. Just take it out of the whatever the container is and put it on glass or ceramic and microwave it. Done it all the time, works just as well. Try and choose containers, reusable water containers that are stainless steel. I use stainless steel, but you could use glass. I don't know. That's been like everything is like kind of also your own personal experiment. And then some of the other things are to also eat lower on the food chain and eat more food you prepare in the home. And that's just basically a way of saying is try and eat less takeout food and less food that's prepared outside the home. We know from own studies that we've done that if you consume a lot of fast food or food that's prepared outside the home, it can have more of these chemicals that we know are in plastics like phthalates. So that's probably also a way that microplastics can get into the food supply via the production of that food. Some other things that people can do are choose clothing that's made from natural fibers. You can thrift your clothes. Actually, wearing something that's cotton, and I thrifted, so there you go. It's totally possible. Now, people may not like this, but it is doable. We have a bunch of tips on our website. I don't know if I've sent you the link, but you can post the link on your website in terms of things that we recommend. Wash your hands before you eat. It's really important. HEPA filter. HEPA filter in terms of vacuuming or wet mop is also really useful. So basically to capture the dust and not stir it up. So that's another recommendation we have. And we also recommend taking your shoes off before you come in the house. Now, how much does that reduce your exposures to microplastics? That's a little more unknown, but you certainly are not going to track in stuff from the street into your house. That's really how that one works. So,
Well, building off of what you mentioned before, this really does seem like a problem that calls for a systemic solution rather than a change in personal behavior, given that, kind of dealt a bad hand, so to speak, by, exposure everywhere in consumer products and elsewhere. What can we do policy-wise? Is it overall, it sounds like we need to put society on a path to transition away from plastic, at least in certain settings, right?
yes, that's what we recommend. Now, I mean, I think there's local actions, there's state, federal, and then there's international action. So just to talk about at the global level, there is a plastics treaty that's being negotiated by many countries around the globe. And some of this was driven by countries who are the recipient of a lot of our plastic trash. So like Rwanda, for example, was one of the initiating countries in the plastics treaty. And I think one of the things that they'd like to see in that is at least a cap on plastic production, because it seems like, the current amount of plastic is working. And then eventually over time to really focus on reducing and replacing. And then with a long-term goal of keeping the fossil fuels in the ground and moving to other types of materials. I mean, that's a long-term goal, but a hopeful part of this is that there are countries who really care about this and are working on a global solution, which really has to be because, for example, other countries, I think China is a bigger producer of plastics, for example, than the United States. So, you have to have other engagement, just like with climate change, other engagement in other countries. I mean, in the United States, I do think, to me, it's one of the things that I think is really important to remember is that people really care about their health. They really care about their children's health. They really are concerned about what they see in terms of these diseases happening in their family or their friends or their community that can't be explained by genetics or other traditional things that have been maybe people have been concerned about. And so it's really important to express that either through collective action, joining a group that you think represents you in terms of government actions. And of course, we always recommend that everyone register and vote, because it's really important for people to hear your voice in every election. And I think that it's not a short, and this is the other part, either about your own personal life or the changes that we want to see. It's not a sprint. It's more of a long-term, one step at a time marathon. And I know it seems a little bit daunting right now, but I like to remember about, if you know the history of smoking in the United States, smoking was a huge part of the GDP back in the 1960s. I mean, 1 in 3 people smoked, maybe probably more than that. And it was really through collective effort of science documenting health harms and health groups getting involved and clinical groups and communication that eventually over time, and policymakers, sometimes local levels, sometimes larger levels, eventually led to, we reduced smoking, active smoking, a lot in our population, and that's been to a very high public health benefit. So I know I don't really like the word journey, but I guess we're on the beginning of our plastic journey, hopefully in a good way. I don't want to have a plastic journey. I want to have a deplasticking journey. I'm not even sure that's a real word, but
Well, Dr. Tracey Woodruff, thank you for being our Sherpa on this deplasticking journey. I sincerely appreciate this information and your time.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks again to Dr. Woodruff, and we've posted that link that Dr. Woodruff mentioned about how to limit your exposure to microplastics at our website, which is woodenteethshow.com. Just go to her episode and you'll see it. Thank you for joining us on YouTube or just via your ears. If you like us, please press some subscribe buttons. I'll see you next time.